Do you ever think about where your electricity comes from? I mean, you probably have, but if the plan is to electrify everything, cars, heaters, factories, now where is all of that electricity going to come from?
Can we ever pause to consider this miracle of electric power by which we live?
Power to move the machines of industry. Power to irrigate great tracts and support the production of food and clothing. Power to process metal and wood and stone. Natural power.
What would happen if suddenly it were to fail? No one even dares to think.
BC Hydro says reservoirs are low, and that's causing ripple effects.
The traditional energy system that we see today, it seems like a very linear process. We've got big generators that generate electricity, usually somewhat far away from people. That power is moved into transmission lines, ends up in the distribution lines that run into homes and businesses, and then, comes out wherever we're using it. As we look at the next 10, 20 years, BC is going to need somewhere between 1.5 to maybe 2.5 times the electricity it has today.
BC Hydro has just released a document called Power Pathway. It's essentially a 10-year plan that says we need to produce more electricity.
From heating and cooling homes to powering personal and public transportation, the role of electricity will continue to grow. Businesses in BC are also looking to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by making the switch to electricity to power office buildings, warehouses, work sites, and industry. And while this switch will not happen overnight, we must prepare now for what is next. Our electricity grid is one of the cleanest in the world, and to meet the scale and pace of what is required next, we need to invest in our system and build for the future. To do this, BC Hydro has in place long-term agile planning processes to ensure we secure the energy we need for tomorrow, while sustaining and building out the infrastructure that provides reliable electricity to communities across the province.
I wanted to get another perspective, so I reached out to Shakti Ramkumar. She's the Senior Director of Policy and Communications at Student Energy, where she leads the organization's work in accelerating a just and sustainable energy future.
So increased energy use, increased wealth pretty much correlates with your life gets better, you have more opportunities, more employment, more productive use of energy to set up businesses and support economic development, that kind of thing. I've always been curious if there is a threshold or a tipping point beyond where increasing energy consumption no longer results in a meaningful increased quality of life. And there's this one study that came out that shows that they have calculated a level of energy use where beyond that level of energy consumption, health and well-being metrics no longer improve.
BC Hydro has thought about this too. At least it looks like it. I did try a number of times to reach out to get their thoughts, although I was quite unsuccessful. But a browse through their website shows that they have a number of programs that are trying to incentivize people to reduce their energy, mostly by rewarding people with money when they use less electricity. But even with all of these programs, they still released Power Pathway. They're still saying that we need to produce more electricity. So amid all this, Shakti gets at an important question. Does producing more supply also mean reducing demand?
There's no question reducing energy demand will play a role, and I think it will come down more to cost and the speed and urgency with which we're able to build out. We're using an old systems way of managing with an increasing amount of new technology that challenges the way that works. So we're just at this sort of tipping point of change where the old system really can't work much as we scale these technologies, and it's going to require us to embrace a certain amount of uncertainty, but certainly some change in processes and the way we think and plan and operate our grid. BC Hydro is starting to ask those questions, but this is the transformation of our utilities and how they think about the electricity system that kind of goes hand in hand with the sort of more flashy, deploying renewable energy sources, putting electric vehicles on the road. It's this quiet reform that's going to happen beneath the surface, which is, how does the utility think and plan for the grid? How do we maintain reliability when we've got a whole bunch of distributed sources all trying to draw and push at different times? All of this requires different ways of thinking. So suddenly the power system itself is going to become much more distributed. We're going to have a whole bunch more power generated from a whole bunch smaller sources.
A lot of what Evan talked about was a shift in systems. And we're currently under an energy system that's controlled by a monopoly, which is BC Hydro. And much of the things that he was suggesting lean towards a system where BC Hydro still plays a big role, but there are also all of these smaller actors that can also play significant roles. I'm on my way to the Hoopachauset First Nations territory, which is just outside of Port Alberni on the island. And I'm really excited to check out, what does an independent power producer look like? On China Creek, just outside of Port Alberni on Vancouver Island, there's something called the Upneat Power Corporation. It's a hydroelectric project that, during its peak operations, can power up to 6,000 homes. And First Nations own 82.5% of the project.
How long have you been here for?
Me? Probably close to 15 years. Started out as a laborer, then got intrigued by what's going on in here enough to be an operator now. So there's two of us that are full-time employees here, myself and my boss, Bert Casper. And so we do a 7-day rotation. So I'll get 7 on and then 7 days off. So there's always someone here.
Gilbert took me around Upneat Power Corporation, which produces electricity in a manner that's known as a run-of-river system. In run-of-river systems, running water from a river is guided down a channel that leads to a generating house. At the generating house, the force of the water spins a turbine and drives a generator, and that produces electricity. A few kilometers up a Forest Service road, we find a penstock, which is where the first steps of creating electricity from a run-of-river system takes place.
This holding chamber feeds the penstock, which is buried under the ground and goes all the way to the powerhouse. So it's like a big water slide.
So I guess this allows you to control
how much water goes in, yes.
So what makes a run-of-the-river project different from other hydro projects?
They're ran different. This is a little bit older style. There's probably less than a handful of these with the bladder system. A lot of them, got their big concrete dams, whatnot. A way better sufficient cleaning system instead of us using these modified rakes. So I'm gonna start with this one and I'm gonna go that way. But the debris I get on the rake, I'm dumping it over the wall. And this rack that I'm cleaning wasn't here before, so they tried a motor system. So these had motors on top, and it was an automated rake could go down and clean these racks, but the motors blew right away because they couldn't keep up with the demand. Yeah.
So how many times a day do you do this?
It all depends. Weather pending and how much debris. Generally, when we have the amount of rain that we had, like in a week, the water levels rise and they'll clean the banks. So then we get leaves, sticks, branches, trees.
In here? Would you say this is pretty average, what you're pulling up now?
For today, it's light.
When do you find there's most debris? Is it when it's raining a lot?
Yeah, lots of rain. Especially when we're touching on the logging practices. I'm seeing a lot more of this finer stuff because Like I said, you go further up the road, there's no trees along the river. And they're not allowed to do that, but they're doing it anyways. And when I was talking about trees, sometimes I have to get the chainsaw at it. Because it sometimes
that's not a windfall.
No.
Yeah, so you're saying how if you look over the corner there, there's like a huge chunk of tree and it's considered as debris because it's blocking this holding tank. But typically it would just be kind of natural leaves and sticks, but there's this huge kind of chainsawed piece of wood. So it's pretty clear that there's logging going on here and the logging's impacting the operations. So the more you know. Then I got to learn exactly how Upneep Power Corporation can power up to 6,000 homes.
This is our good old exciter panel. Tells us our voltage that we're running at.
So that's how much being generated?
Yeah. We don't normally go that high because it's hard on our machines, but we're at 4,000 volts right now per machine. It gets scary sometimes.
I can imagine. That's a lot of...
Yeah.
Oh.
And then this is where the access shoots back out into the creek. This time last year, we weren't running because it was dry.
Wow.
So we had to wait for rain to come.
Without running water, run-of-river systems can't operate. And the summer of 2023 was the driest summer on record.
I've noticed that, like you said, there's a pattern. The past 3 years, everything's been showing up 2 months, 3 months, half a year later than usual. Gilbert talked a lot about how the past few seasons have been super dry. And if it's super dry, there's no water. And if there's no water, you can't generate any power. So I'm thinking a lot about how, with the uncertainty of climate change, as much as we need all this electricity, it also introduces this question of, do we know when we're going to be generating this electricity? And it's hard to tell. I don't know.
I think challenge will be balancing meeting growing energy demand with this sort of constraints that we have with clean energy. You know, as we see more heat waves, things like that, we could have unexpected increases in energy use that we maybe hadn't planned for. Historically, our forecasts for energy demand have always been a little bit higher than what they actually have been. BC's electricity demand is not skyrocketing at like a unprecedented pace, but they could with the more volatile weather, with heat waves, with infrastructure, housing that's not really built to withstand that. So I think that's a challenge, is how do we deal with that unpredictability and planning for that unpredictability while we also try to reduce our emissions and electrify.
This is my territory. This is where I grew up. My name is Kwatuma Kosairs. I'm a Hupachesa citizen in Hupachesa territory. I am a beneficiary of the Upneep Power Corp and an advocate for First Nations power producers. In university, I was an activist. I was like, no pipelines and respect Indigenous rights. But I was always so angry and tired and stressed. I was on Twitter all the time. And I was like, well, I'm kind of tired of being reactive all the time. I want to build the alternatives to what I'm fighting on the streets.
It's thanks to Kwatuma that I got to see what clean electricity generation looks like on the ground. But it hasn't always looked like this.
Upneep Power Corporation became operational in 2005. My mom actually built it because there was a proposed natural gas facility here way back in like the early 2000s, and I was a lot younger then, but my mom was opposed to it, right? She didn't want to burn fossil fuels. So she explored what the options were, and that was the clean energy industry. That was run-of-river was the most viable option.
Kwatuma is the executive director of Clean Energy BC. It's an industry association where he shores up support for clean electricity projects, especially those that are spearheaded by First Nations.
For a long time, we were advocating for more opportunities to build projects, wind, solar, run-of-river, geothermal. So that's where I come in, where there's partnerships between First Nations and our industry partners to build those electricity projects so that we can have that emissions-free electricity into our grid, which is going to be key.
What kind of factors are you seeing that are allowing these projects to be enabled or perhaps not enabled?
It's a good window opportunity because with the shift to net zero emissions by 2050, we need to take climate action now. And it takes a lot of planning amongst a lot of different actors. With First Nations, in that, with the development of and advancement of UNDRIP and reconciliation, we've been able to kind of put ourselves at those tables and having those conversations so that we're not excluded.
I want to think a little bit about the intersections between Indigenous clean energy production and Indigenous sovereignty.
In my mind, it's always been the implementation of UNDRIP. First Nations want this type of opportunity. We want to build electricity projects. We want to build transmission. We want to be part of, the solutions in terms of like our own community priorities, like getting out diesel or making electricity heating more affordable, but also like the wider problems around like how are we going to bring more clean electricity to the grid to be part of the bigger societal problem with electrification and getting net zero. We've been able to kind of put ourselves at those tables and having those conversations so that we're not excluded.
This word excluded is interesting because I look at myself as a settler on these lands, and I've never been excluded from access to clean electricity as long as I pay my bills every month. And that's a privilege.
Nations who are right by BC Hydro Dam, they don't have access to electricity. That was a choice. And so BC Hydro has, very cheap, affordable rates, but that's because it came at a cost of dispossession, destruction of territories, and no payments or benefits to First Nations. And so that's the coloniality of power that is left out of these conversations. And so we need to factor in the history of colonization that's ongoing, and that if we continue to exclude First Nations, we're just replicating the history of colonization, in addition to other other forms of power, whether it's patriarchy or a form of racism, in particular person or class. So I think it's very important to have that context. There hasn't been reparations for past infringements, whether it was BC Hydro or industry. So there was a dam that was built here on Great Central Lake, and it flooded the lake, and it raised the levels of the water. And there's a picture of my great-grandfather. He was our last Atai Hawith, our hereditary chief. And there's a picture of him with our petroglyph. And it's really cool because it shows our presence here, right? It's important to us, but with the flooding, we don't know where it is. So that type of electricity infrastructure is complicit in Indigenous erasure. Now we can't say well, that's our petroglyph because it's gone. It's a challenge, right? How to build relationships with those who are colonizing your territories. It's not a problem just for the electricity sector. It's same with dealing with federal government. And reconciliation is one framework to approach that problem, and that's certainly that's the frame through which we've engaged BC Hydro to have those discussions around at least how do we benefit from new calls for power, new projects. There is a need to address those historical injustices because no matter which First Nation you talk to, they're not going to say a good thing about BC Hydro. And so that does need to be aired. Part of reconciliation is truth, and it's got to be that truth-telling.
People look to BC Hydro as a model in renewable electricity and looking at it as an example of how 98% of our electricity is clean, but also at what cost. One thing I always kind of think about is being a settler on lands that I'm not Indigenous to, what it means to pursue climate action that is also in allyship with Indigenous communities, how we're going to meet the need for electrification with increasing demand for energy at the same time as this call for net zero, at the same time for this supporting of Indigenous sovereignty. I'm wondering, how do you kind of fit all those pieces into the puzzle of what it means for clean electricity to be a climate solution.
The $8.8 billion Site C Dam proposal has the support of the provincial government.
The Site C Dam is nestled in the northeastern corner of BC, out of sight, perhaps, but certainly not out of mind.
It is, without a doubt, an expensive project. It is also incredibly controversial, and once it's built, it will change northeastern BC forever.
The hydroelectric dam is now pegged at a whopping $16 billion.
From the very beginning of this whole process, we stated that we weren't opposed to the creation of the energy. What we're opposed to is the destruction of the valley.
We deliberated on that very question in 2017 and came to the conclusion that it was in the best interest of British Columbians to proceed with the project. I and my colleagues have to accept the situation as we find it, not as how we wish it would be. We are going to complete the project because it's in the best interest of British Columbia. Although Site C is not the project we would have favored, and it's not the project we would have started, it must be completed to meet the objectives our government has set through mandate letters to ministers and commitments to the people of BC during the election campaign.
I pay my BC Hydro bills every month, and now I'm asking, where's my money going? I want more clean electricity to be part of the solution, but is it going to further damage these relationships or repair them?
And that's why I think it's important that, as we think about decarbonization and how to decarbonize, decolonization has to go hand in hand. That way we don't replicate the injustices of the past. We need to have a just energy transition, and it's possible. Like we've seen the projects that are built by First Nations.
BC Hydro recognizes that it can't meet this demand for electrification alone. It recognizes that it needs independent power producers. And so how do you navigate that kind of power shift where all of a sudden BC Hydro is saying, we need you guys. We need you to generate power now.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity because the same with government, BC Hydro, IPPs, First Nations. I think we're all recognizing that we need each other. The histories of the past are the past. We need to actually just all come together and say, well, we have a very short timeline. We need to take climate action, and we need to reduce our greenhouse gases. We need to make sure we get non-emitting electricity into our grid as soon as possible. That way we can meet our rising demand and ensure that also that British Columbia is an attractive place to invest, so people have good jobs. This is a good place to live and work.
We in the Lower Mainland are in a really good position as a community, as a collection of cities, to be the leaders in many ways in demonstrating what climate solutions can look like that, have benefits on communities, on people, on the environment all at once. So I would hope that is like a good, hopeful starting point for the young people in our province, especially, is like there's a lot of good work to be done here and we're in a good position to do it.
This period of time feels different. It feels like people recognize that the way we've always done things, the way our systems have worked, we can't do that anymore. But do the people in power who control our power, do they feel the same way?
Electrification poses a challenge for BC because there's a lot of huge valid concerns around building more mega dams like Site C. And if we are serious about electrification while also trying to not pursue infrastructure that has harmful impacts on communities and the environment, I think that is all the more reason that we should really kind of go forth with demand reduction and energy efficiency, is so that we actually have electricity available for the uses that need it the most.
The whole system requires a whole nother level of cooperation because we expand greatly the number of people who have a stake and a direct involvement in that generation and movement of electricity. I don't think we'll see BC Hydro take on the same role that they do with dams, where they fully build and operate. In the past, those have been largely contracted out. So they'll open up a bid, and then it's up to private developers to come in and say what they can build and what they, the contracts they could provide power for.
I have been working with BC First Nations to shape how First Nations can benefit. And so in that, it's resulted in a minimum equity requirement, which is kind of there's a trend that we've seen in other jurisdictions. The challenge there is creating a floor without creating a ceiling in terms of benefits, so that we can make some incremental progress in the electricity sector. I understand, we're not going to transform the industry overnight. At least First Nations will have equity stakes in all new clean energy projects, in addition to non-equity benefits like jobs, contracting, capacity building funding.
I've been thinking about a few questions. Who's going to be producing our clean electricity? How do we ensure that it's going to be a just transition? And at the end of the day, even if we're going to be producing more clean electricity, how do we simultaneously count on ourselves to reduce demand too?